Ronnie the King Coleman, greatest of all time. Nobody will ever dispute that. I mean, look at the arms. Look at the size of his big man's chest. The quads, they're incredible too. Of course, the midsection, you could say that that's maybe a weakness. A glaring omission? Perhaps. One thing's for sure, he is not flawless. Today we are in search for the Mr. Olympia champion with the least amount of flaws, the least amount of weaknesses. Hopefully it's zero. But when it comes to Ronnie King Coleman, yeah, he has one or two. Calves not the best either. And in the grand scheme of things, he won 8 titles. And amongst those 8 titles, he had weak versions here in 2002. So that's how we're going to do this. We're not looking or focusing in on their best. If they won a bunch, well, you got to take all of them into consideration. And without a doubt, Ronnie King Coleman, the greatest of all time, but also, without a doubt, he is definitely not without weaknesses. Did I say that properly? He has some weaknesses. And so do the other great ones like Dorian Yates. At one point in time, yeah, he was close to being flawless. But look at that bicep. He tore his bicep, and after 94 rather, all the other years he won the title, in particular that last year, 1997. So to say Dorian Yates was flawless, without weaknesses, come on. And even before he tore his bicep, that arm could be considered a weak point and a little bit unsymmetrical in the traps. So that's maybe the 2 greatest out of the way. And then there's Phil Heath. That's maybe the 3 best bodybuilders of all time. And all 3 guys, I think it's obvious that they are not without their weak points. And Phil Heath, he is darn near perfect. He is not missing anything. He has no weaknesses, except his midsection is not, it's not the best. It's kind of a 4-pack. That is a weakness, guys. And as his career progressed, holy old tuna belly. So too did his midsection. So, yeah, he only has one weakness. Maybe he could still win this one, but I don't know. That's a pretty big weakness, is the midsection of one Phil Heath. So when you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, it kind of makes his so-called wide waist look non-existent. Actually looks pretty good, but they do say Arnold had a wide waist, and this is one of those rare angles that the cameraman did get him straight on. He usually tilted a little bit, but the cameraman was able to capture a little bit of a wide waist. But that's not much of a flaw. That's not much of a weakness at all. Of course, we're doing all the Olympias, and in 1980, Arnold proved that he had dandelion spores for legs. Little legs. Even for his time, these were little dandelion spores, like I said. And that and his wide waist. He has a couple of weaknesses, but that just pales in comparison to his little buddy Franco Columbu. He most certainly is not going to win this. He is definitely just full of weaknesses, full of flaws. Big hunk of guy now. I think that's a Fig Newton bar. Not just one of the Fig Newtons, but maybe even a whole box of Fig Newtons in that breast. And he had a very soft set of wheels. Not much separation at all. One of them was a lot smaller than the other, but anyway, we're looking for flawless bodybuilders. We're not picking on Franco. Here is the 3 most recent champions. We have Hattie Shupin, Derek Lunsford, and Samson Dauda. And when it comes to today's critiques, criteria, everything, there is going to be less weaknesses. There is going to be less flaws. But these 3 dudes, they're not perfect. Hattie Shupin has some pointy elbows, and let's face it, I know this is going to give me some haters, but his delts. His delts are a flaw in this otherwise good, perfect physique. Short biceps, too. And as far as Derek, this is difficult, guys. Derek, he has some lack of separation in the chest, delts as well, arms, upper arms. And this pose, his midsection looks decent, but let's face it, it is most certainly a flaw, his midsection. Samson, now, on the contrary, in this shot, his midsection does look a little bit less separation than in all of the other ones, but I don't know if I would call his midsection a weakness or a flaw, considering he had improved it so much. But if I had to be nitpicky, and it is difficult, like I said, Samson is a good dude, but maybe the lack of separation in the arms, maybe some lack of separation in the chest could be a weakness. I wouldn't call that a flaw. I wouldn't call that a flaw at all. But on that note, would I call either of these three flawless? No, I wouldn't. And when it comes to Big Ramy, he's much like Franco Columbu. They both won 2 titles, and they are both just fully loaded with flaws. He has those holes in his quads. His waistline is a little bit blocky here. A little bit. Earlier on in his career, it wasn't. We're talking Olympia wins. And when it comes to his back development, that is a major flaw. That's a major weakness in this guy's armor. Just the back, though, not the lower half. Now, when you look at Brandon Curry, that's the opposite. His back's not bad, good arms. Well, the back's not great. But his weakness, most certainly, hamstrings, glutes, calves. That's 3. That's 3. You're done, Brandon. I'm sorry. I do love Brandon Curry's physique, that's for sure. When it comes to Sean Roden, you kind of look at the legs on this guy. He had calves, he had hamstrings, glutes. He had everything that Brandon Curry didn't have. But his back, is that a weak point? Yeah, I think it is. And if we're gonna be mean, you shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but his tricep was a little bit of a flaw. I don't know what to call it, a flaw. It's definitely a weakness. Look at those traps, though, huh? Peeled. So peeled. Can not being peeled be considered a weak point? Jay Cutler, he had some weak points. He is most certainly not going to be the bodybuilder with the least amount of weaknesses, or the Mr. Olympia champion. His back, that could be considered a weak point for sure. Glutes. What did he have going on with that bicep? Weird. Even in his prime, one could say, well, still about the back, but I mean, his waistline was a little bit blocky. Of course. But, guys, Jay Cutler's one of the best of all time. He beat Ronnie King Coleman. He's not going to win this one, though. And neither is Chris Dickerson. Spoiler alert. This is the elbow that would sting you, whizzer. Look at the size of this big elbow. Wow. So even if it is, considered only one weakness, is that the least amount of weaknesses of any Olympia champion? It's a big one. It's a whopper. Plus, he had a bunch of other weaknesses too, including the midsection. But anyway, let's lay off Chris for a minute. Let's go back to the very beginning. We should have started with this one. This is Larry Scott, and at first glance, you can think, well, he has no separation in his abs or anything of that nature. But it was 65. They didn't really have much separation in the abs. I guess if you could consider a wide waist a weakness or a flaw, he had that. But really, Larry Scott, you take a look at the back, he had calves, he even had some hamstrings. Good lat insertions. So Larry Scott would have to be considered one of the best, considering he only really had one weak point. It wasn't even that bad. A wide midsection. Now, from the first to perhaps the best, the most dominant Mr. Olympia champion of all time, Lee Haney. Did he have any weaknesses? Of course not. He was 8-time Mr. Olympia. Nobody ever touched him. And that's kind of besides the point. He was so dominant. Size, structure, big man's chest. But he absolutely had a few weak points, including the midsection. Not the best setup as far as abs are concerned. Didn't have a bubble gut or anything like that. Calves as well. And as he'd go through some of the shots, we would find out that his bicep peaks, things of that nature, I don't know if they're a flaw, but compared to certain guys, absolutely could be considered a weakness. So Lee Haney, not without his weak points. Who do we got next? Dexter the Blade Jackson, the reflection of perfection. I don't see any weak points, do you? Full arms, gray big man's chest, chiseled midsection, full big quads. And the back, he had everything. Christmas tree, traps, lats, glutes till Tuesday, hamstrings till Wednesday, and... Oh, well, I guess he had one little weakness, didn't he? The calves. And you know what? Other than that, Dexter was perfect. And he would have won this video. I don't know how you win a video, but he would have been the number one bodybuilder with the least amount of weaknesses. Gosh darn it. And then there's Frank Zane. He will be on the top of many people's lists of being the Mr. Olympia champion with the least amount of flaws or weaknesses, because he has none, right? Well, there's kind of two schools on the thought. You compare him with bodybuilders of his time, such as Robbie Robinson. It looked like Frank was lacking V-taper, looked like he was lacking chest. Looks like that's a weak point, and it looks like he has no legs. So when he's by himself, sure, Frank Zane, he is one of those reflection of perfection type physiques, no weaknesses, but he wasn't really that special. Is that blasphemy? I'm sure he thinks he was quite special. 3-time Mr. Olympia champion, things of that nature. But he is not number one on my list, considering there is a guy like Sergio Oliva. He had all that aesthetic flow. He could hit those fancy poses like Frank Zane. And he had all of the strong points in the world. But coupled with that, he had 0 weak points. He had no flaws in this physique whatsoever. And of course, he was not without a great back development as well. Lat insertions. I mean, for the time, they didn't have striated glutes or hamstrings, so you can't really count that. But I would suggest for his time, his hamstrings were decent, more than decent, calves included. So Sergio Oliva, have a look, guys. You find me a weakness, write it down in the comment section below, because he has none. So your winner, Sergio Oliva, well, it's kind of a tie, to be honest with you. I pick Samir Banu. I think Samir Banu has the least amount of weaknesses, the least amount of flaws of any Mr. Olympia champion. Does that mean he's the best? Of course not. He would get crushed by guys like Coleman, things of that nature. But we're talking about flaws, weaknesses. I mean, this back is perfect. Arms, everything. Traps, lats, Christmas tree, I could go on. He even has calves, for goodness sakes. And I don't think they had glutes back then, but what the heck. Samir Banu, he's got some glutes too. So, what the heck. Could use this physique, put it on today's stage. Where would this place at the Olympian Classic Physique? Do pretty good. If anybody's confused, scratching your head thinking, well, why would he put Samir ahead of Sergio Oliva? Well, he hit every pose to perfection even. Sergio, he kind of looked a little weak. The side tricep, maybe even the side chest. But if you're going to split hairs, Samir Banu, he had no weak points in that physique. He had no weak poses. He looked good. He was virtually flawless. So to answer the question, which Mr. Olympia champion has the least amount of weaknesses, the least amount of flaws? The answer is, it could be Frank Zane. It could be Samir Banu. It could be Sergio Oliva. I'm going to go with Samir Banu. Any other guys? I think they do have some, at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 in certain cases. Weaknesses, flaws, things of that nature. Let me know in the comment section below. Did I miss a flaw in this physique? The Christmas tree, maybe? Huh? Did I miss that? I'm just being silly. This Christmas tree was a strong point. I guess they're all as strong points. Calves, hamstrings, glutes. Who cares about striated glutes?